The moon is a polished stone tonight, resting on a bed of dark velvet. Here, on this mountain, the air is thin and clean, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Can you feel the coolness of the tatami mat beneath you? Can you hear the soft, rhythmic tonk of the shishio-doshi, the bamboo fountain in the garden below? It is a sound that measures time, not in seconds or minutes, but in moments of peace. One drop of water, one gentle knock, one moment of silence. This is the rhythm of the mountain. This is the rhythm of sleep. Breathe in the scent of old wood and the faint, sweet smoke of the incense I lit an hour ago. Breathe out the worries of your day, the noise of the city, the weight of your thoughts. Let them drift away like smoke, rising up to join the stars. Here, there is only the mountain, the temple, and the stories that live in the wind. The wind itself is a storyteller. It whispers through the great cedars, murmurs in the bamboo grove, and hums a low song across the temple's tiled roof. If you listen closely, truly listen, you can hear the tales it has gathered on its journey from the sea, over the plains, and up into these high, quiet places. I have spent many years listening to that wind and to the silence that follows it. Tonight, if you will allow me, I will share some of what I have heard. These are not grand tales of samurai and emperors, but small stories, like smooth pebbles you might find in a stream. They speak of the spirits that dwell in the trees and the rivers, the kami who watch over us, and the yokai who walk in the shadows between worlds. They are tales to quiet the mind and soothe the soul. So close your eyes, let the darkness be a soft blanket, and listen. Let us begin in the forest, the deep, ancient heart of this very mountain. The Tale of the Impatient Woodcutter and the Whispering Kodama *. There was once a young man named Kaito who lived in the village at the foot of this mountain. He was strong and his arms were thick with muscle from swinging an axe, but his heart was restless, and his mind was a whirlwind of ambition. He saw the forest not as a living, breathing entity, but as a collection of wood to be felled, a purse of coins waiting to be filled. He wanted to be the richest woodcutter in the province, to have a fine house and silken clothes, and he believed the quickest way to this life was through the swift and unceasing bite of his axe. While other woodcutters would pause to offer a pinch of rice to the forest spirits, Kaito would scoff. While they would listen to the creak and groan of a tree, asking its permission before making the first cut, Kaito would simply spit on his hands, grip his axe, and begin his work with a furious energy. He left behind him a trail of jagged stumps and crushed saplings, never looking back, his mind already on the next tree, the next coin. The forest, for a time, was patient. It watched him with 1,000 unseen eyes. The ancient cedars, whose bark was as wrinkled as an old man's face, stood silent. The playful monkeys who chattered in the high branches fell quiet when he approached. The very air around him seemed to grow still and watchful. Kaito, in his haste, noticed none of this. He heard only the ringing of his axe and the thundering crash of falling timber. One autumn morning, a thick, pearly fog rolled down from the mountain peaks. It was a fog unlike any other, clinging to the ground like a shroud, swallowing sounds and shapes. The elder villagers shook their heads and stayed by their hearths, warning that such a fog was the breath of the mountain itself, a sign to be still and respectful. But Kaito saw the fog as an opportunity. His rivals would be idle, but he, Kaito, would work. He would fill his cart while they slept, and his wealth would grow. He ventured deep into the woods, deeper than he usually dared. The fog was so dense that the trees a few feet away were mere ghosts, gray smudges against a gray canvas. The usual forest sounds were muffled into an unnerving silence. There was no bird song, no rustle of leaves, only the damp, heavy quiet and the thud of his own heart. He found a magnificent cypress, straight and tall, and set to work. His axe strokes, which usually echoed through the valley, now sounded flat and dead, absorbed by the mist. He worked for hours, sweat stinging his eyes, his ambition a hot fire in his belly. When the great tree finally fell with a shuddering groan that seemed to shake the very ground, he felt a surge of triumph. He wiped his brow and turned to head back, but found he could not see the path. He could not see the sun. He could not see anything but the swirling, endless gray. He called out, but his voice was swallowed by the fog before it could travel more than a pace. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of his confidence. He walked in one direction, then another, his boots sinking into the soft, damp moss. The forest, which had felt like a treasure chest just hours before, now felt like a prison. Every tree looked the same. Every shadow seemed to move. He was utterly, terrifyingly lost. He stumbled on for what felt like days, though it was likely only hours. His arrogance crumbled, replaced by a gnawing fear. He was no longer a master of the forest. He was a lost child. Exhausted, hungry, and defeated, he sank to his knees at the base of a gnarled, ancient camphor tree, its branches twisted like arthritic fingers. He buried his face in his hands, and for the first time since he was a small boy, he wept. It was then that he heard it, a soft, strange sound. It was not a voice, not a bird, not an animal. It was a gentle, hollow koro koro koro, like a small, smooth stone being rattled inside a bamboo tube. It seemed to come from everywhere, and nowhere at once. It was a curious sound, not frightening, but deeply calming. He lifted his head, his tears forgotten. He listened. The sound came again, koro koro koro, seeming to echo from the very wood of the trees around him. He stood up slowly, every sense alert. He had never heard such a sound in all his years in the forest. Was he imagining it? Was it the mountain playing tricks on him? He took a hesitant step in the direction the sound seemed strongest. Koro koro koro. It was a little clearer now. He took another. The sound was a thread, and he was following it through the labyrinth of the fog. It led him not towards the edge of the forest, as he had hoped, but deeper still. Yet his fear was gone, replaced by a profound curiosity and a strange sense of peace. He was no longer fighting the forest. He was listening to it. The sound led him to a small, hidden clearing. In the center stood a tree unlike any he had ever seen. It was a colossal oak, so old that its bark was covered in a thick carpet of emerald moss, and mushrooms grew in shelves along its trunk. Its branches reached up into the fog like the arms of a gentle giant, and from them hung strange, pale fungi that glowed with a soft, internal light. The air here was different, still and sacred, like the inside of a shrine, and the sound was here, koro koro koro. It was all around him. He looked closely at the trunk of the great oak, and then at the trees surrounding the clearing. He saw them. Small, white figures, no taller than his knee, with round heads and simple black-dot eyes. Some were peeking from behind the oak's massive roots. Others were perched on low-hanging branches. They were Kodama, the spirits of the trees. They were the soul of the forest. They were not frightening. Their simple faces held an expression of serene neutrality. As they saw him looking, they would tilt their heads, and the rattling sound would echo softly. Kaito realized they were the source of the sound, a form of communication, a language of the wood itself. He had spent his life among these trees and had never once seen them, because he had never once truly looked. He had never been quiet enough to hear them. He stood there for a long time, simply watching. He saw how they moved with a slow, deliberate grace. He saw how the moss on the trees seemed healthier where they stood, how the very air seemed to vibrate with a gentle life force. He looked at his axe, still clutched in his hand. It felt crude and violent in this sacred space. He looked at his calloused palms, hands that had only ever taken from this forest. A profound sense of shame washed over him. He had been a brute, a blind fool. He had seen only dead wood, not the living spirit within. Slowly, reverently, he knelt down. He placed his axe on the mossy ground and bowed his head low, his forehead touching the damp earth. He did not speak words, for he felt words were inadequate. Instead, he offered his regret, his humility, and a silent promise. A promise to listen, a promise to respect. He stayed there, kneeling, as the light began to fade. The fog did not lift, but the glowing fungi on the gray oak began to shine brighter, casting a soft, ethereal light over the clearing. The koro 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 of the kodama became a gentle, continuous hum, a lullaby of the ancient wood. Kaido felt the frantic energy drain out of him, replaced by a deep, quiet calm he had never known. His ambition to be the richest man seemed a hollow and childish dream. What was a purse of gold compared to this? He must have fallen asleep, for when he opened his eyes, the first rays of dawn were piercing through the canopy. The fog was gone. The kodama were gone. His axe lay beside him, gleaming with dew. He could hear the familiar song of a morning thrush, and see the clear, well-trodden path that led back to the village, just a few paces from the clearing's edge. He had been near the path all along, but his panic had blinded him. Kaido picked up his axe, but it felt different in his hand now. It was not a weapon, but a tool, one to be used with care and wisdom. He returned to the village, a changed man. He no longer rushed into the forest. Each morning he would enter slowly, pausing to bow and offer a small prayer of thanks. Before choosing a tree, he would press his hand against its bark and listen. He learned to hear the subtle language of the forest, the sigh of the wind in the pines, the chatter of the squirrels, the creak of a branch heavy with snow. He took only what was needed, clearing away deadfall and thinning groves to allow the young trees to get more light. He became not a taker, but a caretaker. His pace was slower, and he earned far less coin than before, but his sleep was deep and dreamless, and his heart was light. Sometimes, on quiet, misty mornings, if he stood perfectly still and listened with his whole being, he would hear it again. A faint, distant, and deeply comforting sound. Koro koro koro. It was the forest, whispering its approval. And so, the impatient woodcutter learned the wisdom of patience. He learned that the greatest treasures are not taken by force, but received with a quiet and humble heart. The Shishiadoshi marks another moment of peace. The water spills, the bamboo arm falls. Can you feel the rhythm? It is the rhythm of change, of letting go. One story ends, and the space is made for another to begin. The story of Kaito reminds me of another soul, who thought his own skill was the measure of all things. He was not a woodcutter, but a potter, and his lesson came not from the deep woods, but from the cleverest and most mysterious of all the animal spirits. The tale of the perfect potter and the wily kitsune asterisk. In a town famous for its kilns, which breathed smoke like sleeping dragons, lived a potter named Haruki. There was no doubt among anyone, least of all Haruki himself, that he was a master of his craft. His hands, though perpetually stained with clay, moved with the grace of a dancer. He could coax a lump of earth into a vase so delicate its walls were like the shell of a robin's egg, or a bowl so perfectly balanced it seemed to float on the table. His glazes were legendary, deep, lustrous blues that held the night sky, fiery reds that captured the heart of a sunset. People came from all over the province to buy his work, and they paid handsomely. Haruki's workshop was a temple to perfection. Every tool was clean and in its place. Every measurement was precise. He tolerated no mistakes, no accidents. If a pot emerged from the kiln with even the slightest flaw, a tiny crack in the glaze, a shape that was a hair's breadth asymmetrical, he would take it to the stone courtyard behind his shop and smash it without a moment's hesitation. The sound of shattering ceramic was a common one around his home. To him, imperfection was a failure, an insult to his art. He applied this same standard to the world around him. He scoffed at the gnarled trunk of the plum tree in his garden. He winced at the irregular pattern of stones on the path. He saw only flaws, not character. He believed that beauty was a thing to be created, controlled, and perfected by the hand of a master like himself. The raw, untidy beauty of nature held no appeal for him. One afternoon, as the sun was casting long shadows, a woman appeared at the door of his workshop. She was dressed in a simple but elegant kimono of deep indigo, and she moved with a silent, fluid grace. Her face was beautiful, but it was her eyes that held Haruki's attention. They were the color of amber, flecked with gold, and they seemed to dance with a light of their own, full of ancient intelligence and a hint of mischief. She carried no purse, and her hands were empty, yet she had an air of nobility about her. "Master Haruki," she said, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "I have heard that you are the greatest potter in the land. I have come to commission a piece." Haruki, accustomed to such praise, simply nodded. "What is it you desire?" "I wish for a vase," she said, her amber eyes scanning the flawless works on his shelves. "A single vase. But it must be perfect. Utterly, completely perfect. A vessel with no flaw, no error, no imperfection of any kind." Haruki smiled. This was a challenge he welcomed. "A perfect vase is my specialty. What shape? What glaze?" "The shape of a budding lotus," she replied, "and the color of the sky just before dawn, that soft, luminous gray that is neither night nor day. I will pay you whatever you ask, but I will only accept it if it is perfect." "It will be," Haruki stated, his voice full of pride. He set to work at once. He selected his finest clay, kneading it for hours until it was as smooth and supple as silk. He sat at his wheel, and as it spun, a form of sublime grace rose from his hands. The shape was exquisite, the very essence of a lotus bud, full of promise and elegance. He let it dry with painstaking slowness, shielding it from any draft or change in temperature. He mixed the glaze himself, a secret formula of rare minerals, grinding them to a powder finer than dust. He applied it with a single, flawless brushstroke. The firing was the most crucial part. He tended the kiln for 2 days and 2 nights, never sleeping, his eyes fixed on the color of the flames, listening to the sounds of the fire as a musician listens to his instrument. He felt a certainty in his heart. This would be his masterpiece. When the kiln had cooled and he opened the door, his breath caught in his throat. The vase was magnificent. The color was an exact match for the pre-dawn sky, a soft, glowing gray that seemed to shift and shimmer in the light. The shape was sublime. He ran his hands over its surface. It was flawless. The woman returned as promised. She entered the workshop, and her eyes fell upon the vase. She walked around it, her gaze intense. She did not touch it, but simply looked. Haruki stood by, his chest puffed with pride, awaiting her praise. After a long silence she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "It is beautiful. Truly, but it is not perfect." Haruki's pride turned to disbelief. "Not perfect? What do you mean? Show me the flaw." She raised a slender finger and pointed to a spot near the base. "There," she said. "Look closely." Haruki snatched up the vase, his hands trembling slightly. He held it to the light, turning it over and over. He could see nothing. "There is nothing there." "Look again," she insisted. "Look with more than just your eyes. Can you not feel it? A single grain of sand, almost invisible, that has marred the glaze. A tiny, rough point on an otherwise smooth universe. It is an imperfection." Haruki's fingers traced the spot, and he felt it. A minuscule bump, no larger than a speck of dust, but it was there. His perfect vase was flawed. A hot flush of shame and anger rose in his cheeks. How could he have missed it? How could she have seen it? Without a word he turned, walked to his stone courtyard, and with a cry of frustration, dashed the vase to the ground. It shattered into 1,000 gray pieces. The woman watched him, her amber eyes unreadable. "I will return in 1 week," she said. "Try again." And she was gone. For the next week, Haruki was a man possessed. He worked with a feverish intensity, his pursuit of perfection now an obsession. He made a second vase, even more beautiful than the first. He sifted his clay through silk, filtered his water, and inspected his glaze under a magnifying glass. He fired it with even greater care. When he pulled it from the kiln, he was certain this one was perfect. The woman returned. Again she circled the vase. Again she found a flaw. "A single drop of moisture," she murmured, pointing to the lip. It has created a tiny, almost invisible bubble in the glaze. A world of air trapped, where there should be only fire and earth. Haruki, enraged, smashed the second vase. This cycle repeated 3 more times. Each time, Haruki strove for an impossible standard of perfection. Each time, the mysterious woman would appear and, with her impossibly sharp eyes, find one infinitesimal flaw. A slight waver in a line that could only be seen when the light hit it just so. A subtle discoloration on the inside that no one would ever see. After the 5th vase was shattered, Haruki fell into despair. He had exhausted his finest materials, and his spirit was broken. His workshop, once a place of pride, now felt like a prison. He sat amidst the shards of his broken masterpieces, a monument to his failure. For the first time in his life, he felt utterly defeated. He, the master potter, could not create a single perfect thing. That night, unable to work, he wandered out into his neglected garden. The moon was full, casting a silver light on everything. He sat on a cold stone bench and looked at the world he had always disdained. He saw the old plum tree, its trunk gnarled and twisted by 100 years of wind and weather. And yet, in its very imperfection, there was a profound beauty and strength. He looked at the moss growing between the uneven stones of the path, a vibrant, living green in the moonlight. He watched a single, imperfectly shaped leaf drift down from a maple, tumbling through the air on its journey back to the earth. He picked up a stone from the path. It was not round, not smooth. It had cracks and rough edges. But as he held it, feeling its weight and texture, he realized it was, in its own way, complete. It was a product of time, pressure, and chance. It was perfectly itself. A thought began to form in his mind, a quiet revolution against everything he had ever believed. What if perfection was not the goal? What if beauty was not in the flawless, but in the unique, the transient, the imperfect? The Japanese have a term for this, nabi-sabi, a beauty of things imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. He had known the term, but he had never understood its soul. He returned to his workshop, but he did not reach for his finest clay. He took a common, gritty earth from the riverbank. He did not use his precise tools. He shaped a simple tea bowl with his hands, letting his fingerprints remain on the surface. He did not aim for perfect symmetry, but for a comfortable, organic shape that felt good to hold. For the glaze, he did not use his rare minerals. He used a simple ash glaze, knowing its results were unpredictable. He let a single drop of a darker glaze fall onto the rim, allowing it to trail down the side in a pattern dictated by chance and gravity. He fired it in the coolest part of his kiln. When he took it out, it was everything his other works were not. It was humble, it was asymmetrical. The glaze was uneven, and the dark trail of the drip was a stark flaw against the pale surface. It was, by all his old standards, a complete failure. And yet, as he held it in his hands, he felt a warmth and a connection to it that none of his perfect pieces had ever given him. It felt alive. It had a story. The next day, the woman returned. Haruki was not proud or anxious, but calm. He had not slept, but he felt rested. He presented the simple tea bowl to her on a plain wooden tray. She picked it up, her slender fingers cradling its imperfect form. She ran her thumb over the trail of the dark glaze. She looked at him, and for the first time her amber eyes were not challenging, but soft. A slow smile spread across her face. "Ah," she said, her voice a pleased whisper. "At last. A perfect piece." She set the bowl down, and from the sleeve of her kimono she produced not a purse of gold, but a single white foxglove flower, and placed it beside the bowl. She bowed deeply to Haruki, a gesture of profound respect. And as she turned and walked out of his workshop, for just a fleeting moment, in the shimmering light of the doorway, Haruki thought he saw the swish of a fine, white fox's tail. He never saw her again. But from that day on, Haruki was a different kind of master. He no longer smashed his work. He embraced the happy accidents, the quirks of the fire, the personality of the clay. His pieces became famous not for their cold perfection, but for their warmth, their humanity, their asterisk wabi-sabi beauty. And the simple, imperfect tea bowl he kept for himself. He drank from it every morning, a reminder that true mastery is not about control, but about acceptance, and that the most profound lessons can come from the most unexpected of teachers. The air grows cooler now, the moon has climbed higher. Perhaps you can hear the distant cry of an owl, a lonely sound that stitches the darkness together. The story of the kitsune is a story of the mind, of perception. But some stories belong to the heart, to devotion that spans a lifetime. They are rooted in one place, as steadfast and patient as a tree. Let us leave the potter's fiery kiln and travel to a quiet garden, where an old woman and an even older tree shared a single soul. The tale of the silent sakura and the faithful heart. Asterisk. On the outskirts of a small, sleepy village, there stood a cherry tree. It was not like the other sakura trees that burst into a riot of pink and white blossoms every spring, drawing crowds for hanami parties. This tree was ancient, immense, and silent. Its trunk was a gnarled gray fortress, thick as 3 men standing shoulder to shoulder. Its branches were heavy and twisted, reaching out like the weary arms of a giant. And it never bloomed. Not in living memory, anyway. The oldest villagers could not recall ever seeing a single petal on its branches. They said it was barren, its life force spent. The children were a little afraid of it, telling stories that it was the home of a grumpy spirit. Most people simply ignored it, a landmark that was always there, like a mountain or a river. But one person did not ignore it. Her name was Chiyo, and she was an old woman who lived in a small, thatched roof house in the tree's shadow. The tree had been in her family's garden for generations. Her grandmother had told her stories of a time when its blossoms were so magnificent they were said to be clouds descended from heaven. Her mother had tended to it, sweeping the ground beneath its branches and leaving it offerings of water. And now, Chiyo continued the tradition. Chiyo was as old as the tree looked. Her back was bent, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, and her hands were gnarled like the tree's own roots. Every morning, her first act was to slide open her paper screen door and greet the tree. "Ohayo, Sakura-san," she would whisper, her voice thin and reedy. She would then take her broom, made of bound twigs, and gently sweep the ground around its base, clearing away any fallen leaves or debris. She would talk to it as she worked, telling it about her dreams, the gossip from the village, the ache in her bones. The tree, of course, never answered. It simply stood, silent and immense. In the afternoon, she would bring out a small cushion and a cup of weak green tea. She would sit under its vast, empty branches and drink her tea, sometimes pouring a little onto the tree's roots. "A little something for you, too," she would say. She did not expect it to bloom. She did not ask anything of it. She tended to it because it was her companion. It was the keeper of her family's history, a silent witness to her entire life. Its steadfast presence was a comfort, a quiet anchor in her small world. One year, a wealthy merchant from the city came to the village. He was a man with a face like a clenched fist and a heart full of calculation. He saw the village's potential as a resort and began buying up land. He came to Chiyo's little house and saw not her home, but a prime piece of property with a view of the distant mountains. And he saw the ancient cherry tree not as a living being, but as a worthless obstacle. He offered Chiyo a large sum of money for her land. "You are old, grandmother," he said, his voice slick with false sympathy. "You should be in a comfortable new house in the town, not in this old shack. I will give you enough to live out your days in luxury." Chiyo looked from the merchant's greedy eyes to the calm gray bark of her tree. She shook her head. "This is my home," she said simply. "I will not sell." The merchant grew impatient. "But why? This house is falling apart. And that tree," he scoffed, gesturing at the sakura, "is dead. It is useless. It provides no flowers, no fruit, no good timber. I will do you a favor and cut it down." A fire sparked in Chiyo's old eyes. "You will not touch this tree," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "It is not dead. It is sleeping, and it is worth more than all of your gold." The merchant laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. He threatened her, cajoled her, increased his offer. But Chiyo was as immovable as the tree itself. Finally, he left in a fury, vowing to find a way to get the land. Chiyo was deeply troubled. She went to her tree, pressing her wrinkled cheek against its rough bark. "Did you hear him, old friend?" she whispered. "He thinks you are worthless. He does not see your strength, your patience. He does not know you as I do." Winter came, cold and harsh. Chio's old bones ached more than ever, and a persistent cough settled in her chest. She grew frail, and some days it was a struggle just to get out of her futon. But still, every single day she would make her way outside to sweep beneath the tree and share a moment of quiet communion. She felt her own life force waning, like the last embers of a fire. She began to worry. Who would care for the tree when she was gone? The merchant would surely come back and cut it down. The thought was a physical pain, sharper than the ache in her joints. As spring approached, the other cherry trees in the village began to show their first buds, tiny green fists clenched against the last of the winter chill. Chio's tree remained bare. Chio herself was weaker than ever. One afternoon she felt a great weariness come over her. She took her cushion out to the tree as usual, but she did not have the strength to make tea. She simply sat down, leaned her back against the ancient trunk, and closed her eyes. The bark was cool and solid against her spine. She felt the deep, slow pulse of the earth beneath her. "I am so tired, old friend," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how much longer I can protect you. Forgive me." And with that she drifted into a deep sleep, a sleep that was almost a dream. In this dream she was no longer old and frail. She was a young girl again, standing in a place of breathtaking beauty. She was surrounded by cherry trees in full, glorious bloom. The petals fell like a gentle pink snow, and the air was filled with a sweet, delicate fragrance. In the center of this celestial grove stood a woman of ethereal grace. She wore a kimono that seemed woven from the cherry blossoms themselves, and her long, dark hair was adorned with a single, perfect flower. Her face was serene and ageless. The beautiful woman glided towards Chio and bowed deeply. "For generations your family has cared for me," she said, her voice like the sound of wind chimes. "You have swept my roots when I was barren. You have shared your tea with me when I was thirsty. You have spoken to me when I was lonely. You have protected me with a faithful heart, asking for nothing in return. Such devotion does not go unnoticed." The woman reached out and gently touched Chio's cheek. Her touch was as soft as a petal, and it was filled with an immense warmth and gratitude. "Your work is done, little one," she said with a kind smile. "Now, let me show you my gratitude. Let me show them all." Chio awoke with a start. The dream had felt so real. It was the deep twilight before dawn, and the air was cold. She felt stiff and chilled, but also strangely peaceful. She pushed herself up, her old joints groaning in protest. As she got to her feet and turned, she gasped. Every branch, every twig of her ancient silent cherry tree was covered in blossoms. But these were not ordinary blossoms. They were huge, luminous, and seemed to glow with a soft silver-pink light of their own. The entire tree, which had been a stark gray skeleton just hours before, was now a magnificent cloud of light and color, more beautiful than anything Chio could have ever imagined. The air around it hummed with a gentle energy, and the fragrance was so sweet and pure, it brought tears to her eyes. The first rays of the rising sun touched the blossoms, and they seemed to catch fire, blazing with a divine beauty. The sight was so overwhelming, so miraculous, that Chio sank to her knees, her heart full to bursting. The news spread through the village like wildfire. People came from their homes, rubbing their eyes in disbelief. The grumpy old tree, the barren tree, was now the most spectacular sight any of them had ever seen. The merchant, on his way to make another offer, stopped dead in his tracks, his mouth agape. He saw not a tree, but a kami, a divine spirit, manifesting its glory. He was filled with a sudden, profound awe and terror at his own arrogance. He turned and fled the village, and was never seen there again. The villagers gathered around Chio's garden, not daring to enter but whispering in wonder. They saw Chio kneeling beneath the glowing tree, her face upturned, a look of perfect peace on her face. They understood then. It was not the tree that had been barren but their own eyes. Chio, with her faithful heart, had seen its true nature all along. Chio passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 days later, just as the last of the miraculous blossoms drifted to the ground. They said her spirit had gone to join the spirit of the tree she had loved so well. From that year on, the ancient sakura bloomed every spring, its flowers more beautiful than any other in the province. The villagers no longer ignored it. They built a small shrine at its base and cared for it with the same devotion Chiyo had shown. They called it Chiyo Sakura, the tree that bloomed from a faithful heart. It became a symbol not of fleeting beauty, but of the enduring power of quiet love and unwavering devotion. Breathe in the sweet scent of those blossoms. Breathe out and let it go. The Shishiodoshi marks the time. Tonk. A moment passes. A story finds its end. Chiyo's story was one of connection to the land. But sometimes the spirits we encounter are not of the land, but of the water. The river that flows down from this mountain has its own guardians, its own tales. And they are not always what we expect them to be. Let me tell you of a little girl, a firefly, and a creature from the deep. The tale of the lost child and the misunderstood kappa asterisk. The long, hot days of summer had settled over the valley. The air was thick and heavy, buzzing with the sound of cicadas. In the evenings, a cool breeze would finally drift down from the mountains, and the world would come alive with the chirps of crickets and the soft glow of fireflies. For a little girl named Hana, the fireflies were the greatest magic in the world. She loved to watch them rise from the tall grasses by the riverbank at dusk, blinking on and off like tiny wandering stars. Her mother had warned her many times, "Stay away from the river at dusk, Hana. The currents are tricky and it is the time when the kappa come out to play." Everyone in the village knew of the kappa, the water spirits that lived in the river. They were said to be creatures the size of a child, with green, scaly skin, a turtle shell on their back, and a dish-like depression on their head that held water. This water was the source of their power. Stories about them were often frightening. They were mischievous tricksters who loved cucumbers and sumo wrestling, but they were also said to be dangerous, capable of pulling children and animals into the water. Hana was a good girl and usually listened to her mother. But one evening, she saw a firefly that was bigger and brighter than any she had ever seen before. It pulsed with a brilliant emerald light, and it seemed to be beckoning her. Forgetting her mother's warning in her excitement, she darted away from the edge of the family's vegetable patch and began to chase it. The firefly led her on a merry dance, dipping and weaving through the reeds that grew along the riverbank. Hana giggled as she ran, her small hands outstretched, trying to catch the magical light. She ran further and further from home, her focus entirely on the glowing insect. The sky deepened from orange to purple, and the shadows grew long. The firefly floated out over the water's edge. Hana, reaching for it, did not see the slippery moss-covered rock beneath her foot. Her sandals slid, and with a small cry of surprise, she tumbled into the cool, dark water of the river. The shock of the cold took her breath away. The current, stronger than it looked, immediately grabbed her small body and began to pull her away from the shore. She flailed her arms, but her waterlogged cotton kimono weighed her down. Water filled her mouth and nose. Panic seized her. The river, which had always seemed so beautiful and placid, now felt like a hungry monster. She was being pulled under, into the dark depths. Just as her vision began to blur and her lungs burned for air, she felt something strange. It was not the rough pull of the current anymore. It was a pair of hands, cool and webbed, gently but firmly taking hold of her. They were not pulling her down, as she feared. They were guiding her, steering her through the water towards a place where the current was weaker. She felt her head break the surface, and she gasped for air, coughing and sputtering. She found herself in a calm eddy behind a large, dark boulder that jutted out from the river. The water here was still. She was safe from the current. Trembling with cold and fear, she looked to see who had saved her, and her heart nearly stopped. Floating in the water beside her was a kappa. It was exactly as the stories described. It had green skin that shimmered in the twilight, a small shell on its back, and a head with a shallow bowl on top, filled with water that rippled slightly. Its face was somewhat like a turtle's, with a small beak-like mouth and large, dark, mournful eyes. It was not a monster. It did not look angry or malicious. It looked sad. Hana froze, her fear battling with a powerful sense of curiosity. The kappa simply floated there, looking at her with its big, dark eyes. Then, it slowly lifted one of its webbed hands and pointed a long green finger. It wasn't pointing at her, but at something floating in the water just beyond its reach. It was a cucumber, long and green, bobbing on the surface. It must have dropped it. The kappa made a soft croaking sound, a sound of longing. Hana remembered the stories. Kappa loved cucumbers more than anything in the world. And in the pocket of her kimono, she had a small, crisp cucumber that her mother had given her for a snack. Her hand, still trembling, went to her pocket and pulled it out. It was wet and cool. She held it out towards the creature. The kappa's big eyes widened slightly. It looked from the cucumber in her hand to her face, as if asking if it was truly for him. Hana gave a small, shaky nod. The kappa swam a little closer. It did not snatch the cucumber. Instead, it did something extraordinary. It bowed its head to her in a gesture of thanks. As it did so, the water from the dish on its head spilled out into the river. Hana remembered her grandfather telling her that this was a kappa's greatest weakness. Without the water, they were powerless. By bowing to her, the creature was making itself vulnerable. It was a sign of ultimate trust and respect. Hana felt her fear melt away completely, replaced by a wave of empathy for this strange, lonely creature. She gently placed her cucumber into its outstretched, webbed hand. The kappa took it, its touch surprisingly gentle, and made another soft croaking sound, this time a clear sound of gratitude. Just then, Hana heard frantic voices from the riverbank. "Hana! Hana, where are you?" It was her parents. Their voices were filled with terror. The kappa's head snapped up. It looked towards the sound, then back at Hana. With its free hand, it gave her a gentle push towards the shore. The message was clear. "Go. They are looking for you." Hana scrambled onto the muddy bank, her legs weak. She turned back to thank the creature, but it was already gone. All that was left were a few ripples on the surface of the dark water, and the bright blinking light of the firefly she had chased, now hovering over the spot where the kappa had been, as if standing guard. Her parents found her moments later, soaked and shivering, and enveloped her in a tearful embrace. She tried to tell them what had happened, about the gentle, sad-eyed creature that had saved her, but they were too distraught to listen properly. They shushed her, saying she must have been delirious from the cold water, that the river spirits were dangerous and she was lucky to be alive. Hana never argued with them. She knew what she had seen. She knew that the stories were not always the whole truth. A creature could be strange and different without being evil. An act of kindness could be found in the most unexpected of places. She never chased fireflies near the river at dusk again. But every evening, just before the sun went down, she would walk to the edge of her family's garden and place a fresh, crisp cucumber on the large boulder by the water's edge. It was always gone by morning. She never saw the kappa again, but she knew it was there, watching over the river. And she knew that they shared a secret, a quiet friendship built on a moment of fear, a simple gift, and a surprising act of trust. The night deepens. The world outside this temple is asleep. The trees, the rocks, the very mountain itself is breathing slowly, peacefully. The story of Hana and the kappa teaches us not to judge by appearances, to look for the heart behind the strange face. But what of those who judge by the mind alone? Those who believe that the world can be captured in books and scrolls, that everything can be named, measured, and understood? The mountain has its own lessons for such people. And its teachers are often proud, ancient, and possess wings of shadow. Let us climb to the high peaks for our final story. Tale of the Arrogant Scholar and the Silent Tengu Asterisk. There came to this mountain a scholar named Jin. He was a brilliant man, renowned in the capital for his sharp intellect and his vast knowledge. His personal library was larger than the village temples, and he had written several books on the botany, geology, and folklore of the surrounding provinces. He was a man who believed in facts, in evidence, in the power of the written word. He saw the world as a complex puzzle, and he believed that with enough study, he could solve it. He arrived at the mountain, not as a pilgrim seeking peace, but as a researcher seeking data. He carried with him a heavy chest of books, scrolls, brushes, and empty notebooks. His goal was to create the ultimate document, a complete catalog of Mount Akagi. He would name every plant, sketch every insect, map every stream, and, most audaciously, he would interview and classify the various spirits and yokai said to inhabit the high peaks. He took up residence in a small hut not far from this very temple. I met him then, I offered him tea and warned him, as is my duty. "The mountain is not a book to be read, Master Jin," I told him gently. "It is a presence to be felt. Its deepest truths are not written in ink, but in the silence between the bird calls, in the feeling of the wind on your face." Jin smiled a condescending smile, the smile of a man who believes he is speaking to a simpleton. "Thank you for your poetry, old monk," he said. "But I deal in facts, not feelings. A spirit, if it exists, has habits, a nature, a name. These are things that can be recorded and understood. To name a thing is to have power over it." I bowed my head and said no more. Some lessons cannot be taught with words. For weeks, Jin was a whirlwind of activity. He climbed the lower slopes, his notebooks always in hand. He collected leaves, pressed flowers, trapped insects. He wrote furiously, filling page after page with his elegant, precise script. The villagers would see him talking to trees, shouting questions into caves, leaving out offerings of ink stones and brushes for the spirits, as if they were fellow academics who could be bribed into an interview. He was, to them, a source of great amusement. He grew frustrated. The mountain refused to yield its deepest secrets to his intellect. The rarest flowers seemed to wilt the moment he plucked them. The most interesting creatures eluded his traps. And of the spirits, he saw nothing. He concluded that the stories were just peasant superstitions. But one legend persisted, one that gnawed at his pride, the legend of the great Tengu of the waterfall. The stories said that deep in a forbidden, mist-shrouded valley high on the mountain lived a Daitengu, a great Tengu, an ancient and powerful spirit. He was said to be a master of martial arts and arcane knowledge, but he was also incredibly proud and did not suffer fools. The villagers warned Jin to stay away. "He does not like to be disturbed," they said. "He punishes the arrogant." This, to Jin, was the ultimate challenge. To document a great Tengu would be the crowning achievement of his research. Arrogance? He believed himself to be humble in his quest for knowledge. He was not seeking power, only understanding. He ignored the warnings and began his ascent to the Forbidden Valley. The climb was treacherous. The path was unmarked, the rocks were sharp, and a strange, swirling mist made it difficult to see. But Jin was determined. He pushed on, his heavy chest of scrolls strapped to his back, sweat and ambition driving him forward. After a full day of climbing, he heard it, the thunderous roar of a great waterfall. He emerged into a hidden basin, a place of raw, untamed power. A massive waterfall crashed down a sheer cliff face into a churning, turquoise pool. The air was thick with spray, and the roar was deafening. And there, on a flat rock directly in the path of the crashing water, sat a figure. It was a Tengu. He was tall and powerfully built, with dark, feathered wings folded behind him. He had the fierce, red face and long nose of the legends. He wore the simple robes of a mountain ascetic, a yamabushi. He was not moving, not even flinching as tons of water crashed down upon him. He was meditating, his eyes closed, in a state of absolute stillness amidst the chaos. Jin's heart pounded with excitement. This was it! He carefully unstrapped his chest of books, set up his writing desk on a dry patch of ground, and prepared his finest brush and ink. He cleared his throat. "Greetings, great spirit of the mountain!" he shouted over the roar of the waterfall. The Tengu did not move. His eyes remained closed. Jin tried again, louder. "I am the scholar Jin. I have come to learn from you. I wish to record your wisdom for posterity. What is your name? How old are you? What is the nature of your power?" He fired off a dozen questions, his voice shrill with academic fervor. The Tengu remained as still and silent as the rock he sat upon. Jin grew frustrated. Was the creature deaf? Was it ignoring him? He decided a different approach was needed. He would impress the spirit with his own knowledge. He began to lecture, his voice rising in a desperate monologue. He recited the names of all the plants in the valley in classical script. He explained the geological formation of the waterfall. He quoted obscure philosophical texts about the nature of spirits. He talked for over an hour, his voice growing hoarse, his words swallowed by the thunder of the water. Finally, the Tengu moved. He opened his eyes. They were ancient, piercing, and held a glint of something that looked like amusement. He did not speak. Instead, he slowly rose, shook the water from his wings, and stepped off the rock. With a single, silent leap, he landed on the ground in front of the stunned scholar. He was even more intimidating up close. The Tengu simply looked at Jin, his gaze stripping away all of the scholar's pride and self-importance. Then, the spirit raised a single finger and beckoned Jin to follow him. He led him to a narrow ledge at the edge of the cliff, overlooking a dizzying drop. The wind howled here, threatening to tear them from their perch. The Tengu, with perfect balance, stood on one leg. He then pointed at Jin, indicating he should do the same. Jin, a man of books and soft living, tried. He wobbled precariously, his arms flailing. The wind pushed him and he yelped in terror, scrambling back from the edge on his hands and knees. The Tengu watched, his expression unchanging. He had not used words, but his lesson was clear. Your mind is full, but your body is weak. You are not balanced. Next, the Tengu led him back to the basin, to a single maple tree whose leaves were turning a brilliant crimson. The Tengu stood beneath it, perfectly still. He watched as a single leaf detached from its branch and began to flutter down. In one fluid, effortless motion, the Tengu's hand shot out and caught the leaf before it touched the ground. He then opened his palm and looked at Jin, a clear invitation. Jin tried. He stood under the tree, his eyes darting back and forth, trying to predict which leaf would fall next. He lunged and swiped, but he was always too early or too late. Leaves fell all around him, but his hands closed on empty air. He was so focused on the goal, on the asterisk act of catching, that he could not simply be present and react. After several minutes of frantic failure, he gave up, panting. The Tengu's silent lesson continued. Your mind is quick, but you are not present. You cannot grasp the fleeting moment. Finally, the Tengu sat on the ground and simply closed his eyes, gesturing for Jin to do the same. Jin, frustrated and humbled, sat. What are we doing? He asked. The Tengu put a finger to his own lips. Silence. Jin tried to sit in silence, but his mind was a noisy storm. He thought about his failure, about the Tengu's arrogance, about the long journey back down the mountain. He fidgeted. He coughed. The roar of the waterfall filled his ears. After a few minutes, he couldn't stand it. I don't understand. What am I supposed to be doing? The Tengu opened his eyes, and for the first time, he spoke. His voice was not a shout, but a deep, resonant rumble, like stones grinding together, and it cut through the roar of the waterfall as if it were a mere whisper. You are trying to listen to the waterfall, the Tengu said. Listen, instead, to the silence that holds the sound. And with that, the Tengu stood up. He looked at Jin's neat little writing desk, his stacks of scrolls, his meticulously organized notes. A slight smile touched the corner of the spirit's beak-like mouth. He raised one of his great, dark wings and, with a single, powerful flap, created a tremendous gust of wind. The wind tore through Jin's camp. His precious scrolls were lifted into the air, his inkstone was overturned, and his lifetime of research, hundreds of pages of notes and observations, was scattered into the spray of the waterfall. The ink ran, the paper turned to pulp. In a matter of seconds, his work was destroyed. Jin cried out in despair, reaching for the fluttering scraps, but it was useless. He turned on the Tengu, his face a mask of fury. Why? Why did you do that? That was my life's work. The Tengu simply looked at him, his ancient eyes holding not malice but a kind of pity. Your work was a cage, the Tengu's voice rumbled. You tried to put the mountain in a box of words. But the mountain cannot be contained, it can only be experienced. You came here to find knowledge, but you have no room for wisdom. The Tengu then turned, spread his magnificent wings, and with a powerful leap, launched himself into the air. He circled the basin once, a great, dark shadow against the mist, and then disappeared over the cliff's edge. Jin was left alone. He was cold, exhausted, and everything he valued had been destroyed. He sat there for a long time, the roar of the waterfall his only companion. But as the sun began to set, he stopped hearing it as just a noise. He began to listen, as the Tengu had instructed. He listened to the different tones within the roar, the deep bass of the main cascade, the higher splash of the spray, and then he began to hear the other things, the drip of water from a fern, the chirp of a hidden cricket, and in between all of it, a profound, deep silence, the silence that held it all. He had no scrolls, no ink, no theories. He had only the mountain. And for the first time, he was truly seeing it, truly feeling it. He made his way back down the mountain the next day, a different man. He carried no books. His hands were empty. When he passed my temple, he stopped. He did not speak of the Tengu. He simply sat with me, and we shared a cup of tea in silence. I could see it in his eyes. The frantic, grasping intellect was gone, replaced by a quiet, deep calm. He had gone up the mountain to capture its essence, and had instead lost his own ego. He had learned the difference between knowing the name of a thing and knowing the thing itself. He left the mountain the next day and was never heard from again. But I like to think that he did not return to his books. I like to think he found a quiet place, perhaps by the sea or in a small forest, and spent the rest of his days not writing but simply listening, learning to catch the single falling leaf. And now the moon has made its long journey across the sky. The first hint of gray is touching the eastern horizon. The stories are over. The night is quiet. The Shishi Adoshi has fallen silent, its work done. The woodcutter learned to listen to the forest. The potter learned to see beauty in the imperfect. The old woman showed the power of a faithful heart. The little girl found kindness in a feared creature. And the scholar learned to find wisdom in silence. They are all just stories, pebbles from a stream. But perhaps, as you drift into sleep, you can feel their weight, their smoothness. They are reminders. Reminders to be patient, to be humble, to be kind, to look past the surface, to be still and to listen. Listen now. Can you hear it? The soft rustle of the leaves outside, the whisper of your own breath. In and out, in and out. That is the rhythm of the mountain. It is the rhythm of the universe. It is the rhythm of your own peaceful heart. Let it carry you now. Let it carry you into a deep and restful sleep. The mountain is watching over you. The spirits are quiet. All is well. Sleep now. Sleep.